Hey guys, Jano0, how you doing? I hope all is well in YouTube land, whatever part of the world that you're in. This will be part 2 of the home canning and preserving video series. In this part we're going to talk about jars and lids and rings and utensils. We'll start off with the jars. Jars come in all different kinds of shapes and sizes and quantities and makers and colors and all. I mean, there's jars everywhere. And all I can tell you about is the jars that I use and my personal preferences and my opinions. I am not by no means an expert in any of this kind of stuff. This is just what I use and what I do. I'm just a dude who cans a lot. So here's what we got. When you buy jars, they're going to usually come in a case that looks like this. They will have lids and rings with the jars. These are ball wide mouth jars. I try to use ball jars for most of my canning simply because they're tried and true, and I've never had any issues with ball jars. I've used some of the other cheaper jars. They have failed me in pressure canners, and you know, if we're in a point to where we're really depending on the food that we're canning, I don't want to take a chance on any kind of failure. So I use ball jars most of the time. Now they come in what they call regular mouth jars, which will have the neck and the smaller mouth, and then they have what they call the wide mouth jars, which is the neck and the rings itself is just about the same size. So regular mouth and wide mouth. I use the regular mouth jars for stuff like sauces and salsa and stuff that's broth and stuff like that that's easily poured out of the jar. And then I use the wide mouth jars for things like meats and big chunks of vegetables and stuff like that, it has a more difficult time coming out of the regular mouth jar. A couple of things about your jars to remember is whenever you are bubbling or packing something into your jar, always try to use a rubber or a plastic utensil. Don't use metal. Something that I've learned in the past couple of years since I've been doing a lot of canning is that metal utensils will sometimes chip the jars, either the rims or the inside of the jars, and when you get a chip in the jar, especially on the rim, it will have a very hard time sealing, and if you chip the inside or the outside of your jar, then that'll be a place for a crack to form, and then once a crack forms, then the integrity of the jar is compromised and it won't be able to hold pressure. I would not recommend putting your jars in a microwave if you're going to warm something up. I have not had any personal experience with that, but I have heard that if you microwave your jars, it changes the something in the glass of the jar, and it will easily fracture, and it won't be able to hold pressure in the canning process either. Like I said, I'm not an expert. These are just things that I've heard and learned over the last few years since I've been doing this. You can see, like right here, I've got a jar of meat and a jar of tomato sauce, and the meat is a lot easier to get out of the jar using a wide mouth than it is using a regular mouth. So there's a couple of different kinds of jars that we use. We use pint jars quite a bit for canning up sauces and jellies and so on and so forth. And they use these regular mouth lids and rings, which will fit right on the regular mouth jars, but not on the wide mouth jars, as you can see. The lids that I use the metal. I don't use the plastic reusable, the Tatler lids. I know there's a lot of people that do. I don't have any experience with those. I've never used them, so I don't have any kind of opinion on those lids. I like the old-fashioned tried and true metal lids. The lid, as you can see the red ring on the inside, that is some sort of a rubberized epoxy of something. I don't know what it is exactly, what the chemical mixture of it is, but when this lid gets hot and wet, then this ring right here of the red epoxy becomes pliable, and what it does is it molds itself around the rim of the jar. That way it creates a seal, and whenever you're heating up the contents of your jar canning, when you have your lid and your ring on, the air that's in here the contents will rise and expand as they get hot, and that pushes the air out around the lid through the ring. That's why there's two pieces to these lids and rings, so the air can escape out of the lid like this, and the ring keeps it in place. And once the air is all the way out and the the red part of the rim has become pliable for it to be able to seal down, then it seals, and as the jar cools, the contents cools, and it starts cooling and contracting, it pulls the air down through here, and that's what causes your vacuum, and that's what gives you your vacuum seal. Like I said, I'm not an expert, that's just how I think it works, and it makes sense to me. So that's how these things seal. And then once you have a sealed jar, you notice that these jars here are sealed, and I don't have the rings on them. I store my jars with the rings off, because during the canning process there will be some water and condensation that can form between the lid and the ring, and if you store it for a long enough period of time, that will begin to rust, and if it rusts on there, you're going to have a hard time trying to get the ring and the lid off without damaging the rings or the rim of your jar. So I hope that makes sense. There's different types of lids out there, like I said. Usually I use the ball lids. I sometimes use the cheaper version of the lids only for water bath canning. These are mainstays. I think they're the Walmart brand. And there's several different types and brand names out there. I try to use always the ball lids, wide mouth and regular mouth lids, because they have very rarely do I have a failure on sealing. The cheaper brand lids, I have had them fail in the past in the pressure canner. So I try to, just to make sure that I spend, another quarter or 30 cents more and get the ball lid stuff that I know that works, and it's a better quality and a little bit thicker metal material. So those are a little bit about the rings and the jars. The utensils that I use, I bought this as a set. It came in a tall green box. It was just called, I believe, the canning utensils, something by Ball. And inside the box was a funnel, a jar lifter, a lid lifter, and this plastic spatula type thing right here. This is what I use whenever I'm put stuff in the jar. Then I'll take this particular tool and run it around the edge to get all the air bubbles out, because any air bubbles that are stuck inside of your jar can lead to contamination, because that's outside air, and the air that's flowing all around us has spores and bacteria and stuff like that in it. So you want to try to get as much of the air out as you can when you're canning. This also has on this end this little step down gauge right here on the very end. You can use this to measure how far down you want. So if you need 1 inch of headspace, then you can use this last one here, and that'll give you 1 inch of headspace on your jar. And then so on and so forth, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. That's what these step down here is for. But the main thing that I use it for is to take it like this and run it around the edges and down through whatever it is you have in your canner to get the air bubbles out. The jar lifter is exactly that. As when you're bringing it out of the canner, you can just simply open this up and grab your jar easily with that and lift them out of your canner without burning yourself. The lid lifter has got a little round end down here with a magnet on it, so that way when you have your lids in your hot separate saucepan of hot water, you can reach in with your magnet and pick up your lid so that you can place your lid on your jar without having to burn your fingers in the hot water. So that's what this here is for. And then the funnel, of course, is for easily filling up your jars with whatever it is that you're going to be canning. Most canning recipes and most things that I can, each quart jar will get a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Salt is just an additional preservative, and it adds a little bit of flavor to, like the meat. Whenever I have a quart jar of meat, I'll always add a teaspoon of salt to the mix. 1, as an extra preservative, and 2, adds a little bit of flavor to the meat. Most people will have in their kitchen this iodized salt. I do not recommend using iodized salt because it has iodine and some other stuff in there that's just not regular salt. I would recommend using canning salts or just regular plain salt. You can buy this right on the same shelf that you buy this here at. It's right next to it, and it just says just regular salt. It has nothing else in it, just salt, or like I say, canning salts. So there you go, guys. Just a little bit about the jars and the rings that I use. Not an expert, so I'm just trying to take this step by step for any beginners out there who have questions, because when I started canning, I had lots of questions about what things were, what was used for, what's best for this, and this is what works for me, and this is the stuff that I use. So I hope this helps. In the next video, we will start actual canning, and we will do simple water bath canning, and we'll just take it from there. So if I can do it, you can do it. Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great day. God bless. The end. Okay, not the end. Sorry about that. One thing I forgot to mention was the extra rings. The lids will come in small boxes like this that are easily stored on your shelves, but all the rings from your jars will need to be stored. And for me, I have found that I just took a wire coat hanger and made this wire thing like this, where you can just attach it and hang it onto a shelf or onto a nail on your wall. Some people use pieces of string. Some people use coat hangers that they just bend down a little bit. Whatever works for you and how you want to store your rings is fine. Rings are easy to store. They just need to be out of the way. And I found that hanging them on a string or something like this is much easier than having a whole box full of loose rings running around in one of your drawers. So I wanted to throw that in on the end. And that's it for now. So thanks for watching. In the end, again. Buzz, buzz, the end.